Well, this will be the first presidential election since Roe versus Wade was overturned and returned the decision to the states. Since then, Iowa lawmakers passed an abortion law that bans abortion once cardiac activity has been detected. That's usually around 6 weeks. Abortion could also be a factor that decides congressional races. Capitol reporter Connor Hendricks takes a look.
2 congressional races in Iowa could be among the most competitive in the country. In particular, Central Iowa's 3rd congressional district is being targeted by both conservative and progressive fundraising groups. Here's how incumbent Republican Congressman Zach Nunn and Democratic challenger Lanon Baccam are going after each other on abortion.
Women no longer have the right to make their own personal health care decisions.
On a press call last week, Baccam said Nunn supported Iowa's 2023 abortion law, which is now in effect.
Make no mistake, this is Zach Nunn's abortion ban here. He supported it when he was at the state Senate, and he won't stop there.
Zach Nunn was not in the state legislature in 2023. He did, however, support a similar abortion law when he was in the Iowa House in 2018. Baccam also claims Nunn supports a national abortion ban.
I think folks have already said it. This is just the start. More is to come. And Zach Nunn will try to pass a national abortion ban if given the chance, with no exceptions, even in the case of rape, incest, and the life of the woman.
In a Republican primary debate hosted by WHO 13 in 2022, Nunn raised his hand in favor of a national abortion ban.
In your mind, should all abortions be illegal in this country? Hand up if you say yes.
Just to be clear.
All abortions, no exceptions, should be illegal. So you all think there should be no exceptions.
But minutes later in the debate, Nunn clarified his position.
Is there a role for Congress here or not?
Under the 10th Amendment, this should be back to the states, exactly where it's designated.
Okay.
Mudslinging aside, where do each of the candidates actually stand on abortion? Baccam says he opposes a national abortion ban and wants Congress to restore Roe versus Wade provisions, which essentially legalized abortion in the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy. Nunn says he opposes a national abortion ban too and wants states to be able to set their own abortion policy. According to a Des Moines Register poll, 61% of Iowans say that abortion should be legal in all or most cases, while 35% say it should be illegal in all or most cases. At the Iowa Capitol Bureau, I'm Connor Hendricks reporting.